let's take a moment to appreciate modern comforts like Tylenol, indoor heating, and not getting dumped into a swamp after death. Because today's tale, it's a certified Iron Age horror show. Enter Mora, or, as she's sometimes called, the Girl of Uchter Moor, a young woman whose life was basically the ancient version of a non-stop bad day. So, who was she? Mora was a bog body. Yep, you heard right. A bog body, which is basically a human preserved in a peat bog, a kind of super soggy plant matter swamp that's great for naturally mummifying people and not so great for, living. Think of it as history's least relaxing spa treatment. Her remains were discovered in Germany back in the year 2000, and at first people thought she might be a recent missing person, maybe a partygoer who vanished after a night out. But nope, turns out she was over 1,000 years old, hailing from the Iron Age, and was somewhere between 17 and 19 when she died. So, basically still a teen, except her life? Way more brutal than your average high school drama. First off, her skeleton read like a laundry list of pain. Mora's body showed signs of intense physical labor, probably hauling heavy stuff like water jugs through marshy terrain. Basically, CrossFit, but involuntary and way less Instagrammable. But wait, it gets worse. Her skull had 2 massive fractures that had healed, which means she survived a major head injury. Not just a bump, these were serious bone-cracking impacts, likely caused by blunt force trauma. Could have been an attack from outsiders, could have been someone from her own village. Either way, the girl took a hit and lived to tell the tale, though probably with constant headaches and possible neurological symptoms. And as if that weren't enough, Mora also had a benign tumor chilling at the base of her skull. This unwelcome passenger probably messed with her nerves, gave her even more headaches, and caused her spine to curve. Hello, chronic back pain. Her legs? Inflamed to the point that it actually changed the shape of her bones. And all this while still a teenager. Oh, and did we mention she was also malnourished? Her bones showed signs of childhood starvation and illness, likely from cold winters and not enough to eat. Basically, Mora's body was constantly fighting itself and the environment. Every single day must have felt like level 100 in survival mode. Now, as for how she died, there's no evidence she was murdered, which is weirdly the good news here. That said, there's one odd detail that raises eyebrows. She was found completely naked, with no personal items, no jewelry, nothing, which suggests someone moved or altered her body before dumping her into the bog. Why? We don't know. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was secrecy, or maybe it was just how her community handled death. Either way, it's suspicious. And just when you think her saga couldn't get more depressing, her discovery was a mess. Literally. She wasn't gently unearthed by archaeologists, but accidentally scooped up and shredded by a machine. Her remains had to be pieced together like a 1,000-year-old jigsaw puzzle. Even in death, Mora couldn't catch a break. So, yeah, next time you complain about a tough day, just remember Mora. Iron Age teenager, survivor of blunt trauma, tumors, malnutrition, and finally, a brutal post-mortem recovery. Life back then, no Wi-Fi, no snacks, just pain. It was September 30th, 1999, in Tokaimura, Japan, a quiet town northeast of Tokyo. But at a nearby uranium processing plant, 3 workers, Hisashi Uchi, Masato Shinohara, and Yutaka Yokokawa, were about to trigger one of modern history's most horrifying nuclear disasters. The facility, run by JCO, Japan Nuclear Fuel Conversion Company, was supposed to operate under strict safety protocols, but looming deadlines led to shortcuts that turned catastrophic. Instead of following proper procedures, the team transferred uranium into a precipitation tank using stainless steel buckets. Yes, buckets. Worse, the tank was designed to hold no more than 2.4 kilograms of uranium. The workers, they poured in a staggering 16.6 kilograms, turning it into a ticking time bomb. At 10:30 a.m., the unthinkable happened. A bright blue-white flash illuminated the room, the sign of a nuclear chain reaction. Radiation levels surged, hitting the workers with doses so extreme they defied measurement. Ouchi, closest to the tank, absorbed 17 sieverts of radiation, enough to kill 4 people. Shinohara received 10 sieverts, and Yokokawa, positioned farther away, absorbed 3. The effects were instantaneous and brutal. Ouchi vomited uncontrollably as the radiation tore through his cells. Shinohara and Yokokawa experienced nausea, confusion, and searing pain. Emergency alarms blared. The plant was evacuated, and all 3 were rushed to a Tokyo hospital. But the damage was irreversible. Ouchi's suffering became infamous. His immune system was obliterated, his skin sloughed off, and his organs began to fail. Despite his pleas for the agony to end, doctors repeatedly resuscitated him at his family's request. For 83 agonizing days, he lingered before succumbing on December 21, 1999. Shinohara endured months of torturous treatment, but passed away on April 27, 2000. Yokokawa survived, though his life was forever changed by ongoing health problems and the weight of the disaster. The devastation didn't stop with the workers. Over 10,000 residents in the surrounding area were tested for radiation exposure. While most escaped severe harm, 667 were exposed beyond safe levels. Fear of contamination swept through the town, crippling the local economy and leaving psychological scars that lingered for years. In the aftermath, JCO faced lawsuits, financial collapse, and public outrage. Yokokawa and other employees were charged with negligence, while the company paid $121 million in compensation. Japan tightened its nuclear safety regulations, but for many, these reforms came far too late. The Tokaimura disaster is a chilling reminder of the cost of cutting corners. It's a story of human error, unimaginable suffering, and the devastating price of ignoring safety in the face of pressure. For Ouchi and his colleagues, it was more than a tragedy. It was a grim legacy, a haunting example of how a single misstep can lead to catastrophic consequences. Deep in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico lies the sacred cenote of Chichen Itza, a gaping sinkhole once believed by the ancient Maya to be the very doorway to the underworld called Xibalba. To the modern eye, it looks like a tranquil pool framed by limestone cliffs and jungle greenery. But beneath that greenish water lies a graveyard of grim devotion. During the height of the Maya civilization around the 9th century, this cenote became a stage for rituals that blended faith and horror, where humans were sacrificed to please the rain god Chak. Archaeologists, who later dredged its depths, uncovered a nightmarish collection of evidence, hundreds of human bones, disjointed and battered, lying among glittering treasures like jade ornaments, obsidian knives, gold discs, and pottery shards. The discoveries revealed that the cenote was not just a place of worship, but a watery altar where blood and fear met their end. When researchers first explored the sacred cenote in the early 1900s, they expected offerings of valuables, not the grim remains of men, women, and children. As they hauled the sediment from the bottom, they found skulls bearing fractures and punctures, bones showing clear cut marks, and joints that appeared forcefully dismembered. Forensic analysis later confirmed that many victims had suffered violent trauma before death. Some were decapitated, others stabbed repeatedly, and a few were likely thrown in alive, their final moments spent struggling in the dark water. The mixture of genders and ages painted a horrifying picture of the Mayas' desperation to appease their gods. The bones of young boys and girls were particularly common, their innocence believed to make them more pleasing sacrifices. The brutality of their deaths left no doubt that these were deliberate and ritualistic killings carried out with unwavering purpose. The scene, if imagined at the time, would have been both mesmerizing and dreadful. Priests in elaborate feathered robes chanting prayers while the crowd watched in tense silence. The victim, often drugged or bound, would be led to the edge of the cenote, the surface glimmering below like a mirror to another world. Sometimes their chests were cut open to offer a beating heart to Chak before the body was hurled into the abyss. Other times they were tossed alive, their screams swallowed by the cavern's echo. The water below, believed to lead to the gods, became a liquid tomb of devotion and death. As years passed, layer upon layer of bones and relics accumulated, forming a macabre archaeological record of faith-driven violence. Modern dives into the cenote have uncovered remains showing blunt force trauma, broken ribs, and skulls smashed from behind, suggesting that some victims were clubbed before being offered. Others had neck vertebrae sliced cleanly, consistent with ritual beheadings. There were even indications of burn marks on certain bones, implying that fire played a role in some ceremonies, perhaps to purify the offering before its descent into the sacred waters. These discoveries transformed the cenote from myth to historical reality, showing that the Mayas' devotion to their gods was not just symbolic but written in blood and bone. For centuries, the cenote's waters kept their secret well, but once disturbed, they revealed the dark beauty of a civilization that saw life and death as part of the same sacred cycle. To the Maya, these acts were not mere brutality. They were divine exchanges, human pain for heavenly rain. Yet, for modern observers, the image remains haunting. Hundreds of bodies lying silent at the bottom of a natural well, their bones whispering of terror, sacrifice, and belief. The sacred cenote of Chichen Itza today stands calm, its surface reflecting the sky. But beneath lies the chilling truth that this peaceful pool was once a blood-soaked gateway to the gods, where countless lives ended in brutal devotion. We're heading to the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth, where, ironically, one unlucky soul managed to pull off the impossible: death by drowning. Yeah, in the desert. If that doesn't scream zero chill, I don't know what does. So, let's rewind about 5,500 years. It's the Neolithic era. You're a coastal guy living in what's now northern Chile, a place so dry it makes Death Valley look like a kiddie pool. But back then, much like now, the Atacama was brutal, blazing hot by day, freezing cold by night, and completely uninterested in your survival. Still, people made it work, especially near the coast, where seafood was plentiful and the ocean offered both dinner and danger. Enter our unfortunate protagonist, a man around 35 to 45 years old, buried in a round stone tomb on a bed of seashells. Sounds kinda peaceful, right? Maybe even elegant. But don't be fooled, this wasn't a spa burial. Scientists were puzzled. The guy had no obvious injuries, no spear wounds, no bear maulings, no Neolithic slips and falls. He just dropped dead, or so it seemed. Then came the microscopic bombshell: diatoms. What the heck are diatoms? Tiny algae that live in water. Not the seaweed on your leg kind. These are invisible to the eye, floaty ocean dwellers. And somehow, they were inside his bones, which, for the record, is not where diatoms belong. The only way they end up in your skeleton is if you inhale water so violently that your lungs burst. Water floods your bloodstream, and those tiny algae hitch a ride all the way into your marrow. Yeah, it's as bad as it sounds. In short, homeboy drowned. In one of the driest places on Earth, while living near the coast, sure, but still, the irony is thick. Now, this guy wasn't exactly thriving before the ocean claimed him. His skeleton showed advanced arthritis. His legs were worn down, probably from years of squatting to gather shells. His arms and shoulders were overdeveloped in the worst way. Clearly the result of non-stop rowing, swimming, and chucking harpoons at fish. Basically, he was a prehistoric gym rat who never skipped leg day. But it came at a price. To make matters worse, he was also severely iron deficient. And why? Tapeworms? Giant, gnarly parasites likely picked up from eating fish that were about as cooked as your average sushi roll. So, let's tally this up. Back pain, busted knees, worm-infested guts, and a final breath that involved inhaling the Pacific. Oof, but wait, it gets weirder. He wasn't alone. Buried beside him were 3 others, another adult male, a woman, and an infant. All 4 dated to the exact same time. So, naturally, people started thinking disaster scenario. Earthquake plus tsunami equals prehistoric wipeout. Makes sense, right? Well, not quite. The other 3 skeletons, no diatoms, not even a trace, which means they did not drown. So much for the tsunami theory. The current thinking is this: our guy drowned, maybe while diving for shellfish. The others? They died around the same time, maybe even the same day, but from something else entirely. Dehydration, exposure, illness, or maybe just life being the worst. So, to wrap it up, one overworked fisherman with a tapeworm and crumbling joints drowns in the ocean, in the middle of the driest desert on Earth, while 3 companions drop dead nearby from unrelated causes. It's basically a 5,000-year-old group project from hell, and one mystery no one's figured out yet. And next time you're at the beach thinking, I could totally live here, remember, this guy probably thought the same thing, until the ocean quite literally dragged him under. It was a spring afternoon on March 24, 1944, in Alcolu, South Carolina. 14-year-old George Stinney Jr., a small, cheerful African-American boy, was outside playing with his younger sister, Amy. The siblings were approached by 2 young white girls, 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 7-year-old Mary Emma Thames. The girls were on a simple mission, looking for wildflowers, and asked George and Amy for help. The siblings didn't know where the flowers were, so the girls continued on their way. That evening, Betty and Mary never returned home, triggering a frantic search across the community. Even George and his family joined in, with George casually mentioning that he'd seen the girls earlier that day. The following morning, the search came to a horrifying end. Betty and Mary's bodies were found in a ditch, brutally beaten. Almost immediately, suspicion fell on George. The local sheriff claimed George had confessed after hours of questioning. Allegedly, he admitted to using a blunt object and making inappropriate remarks about one of the girls. But here's the catch. There was no written or recorded confession, no physical evidence, and no witnesses tying George to the crime. Despite this, he was swiftly arrested and labeled the sole suspect. At just 14 years old, George was a boy small for his age, standing at 5'1" and weighing 95 pounds. Yet, he was thrown into an adult system that chewed him up and spit him out. He was interrogated for hours, alone, with no parent or lawyer by his side. Whether the confession was real or coerced was anyone's guess, but it wouldn't have mattered. The town had already decided he was guilty. Less than a month later, George was put on trial. If you're picturing a courtroom drama, think again. This wasn't a trial, it was a circus. His court-appointed attorney, a tax lawyer with 0 criminal experience, barely put up a fight. No alibi was presented, no witnesses were called, and no evidence was challenged. It took the all-white jury just 10 minutes to deliver their verdict. Guilty. The sentence? Death. George's execution came on June 16, 1944, just 2 months after his trial. The electric chair built for adults dwarfed his small frame. To fit him, officers had to prop him up on a Bible. The straps hung loose, and the face mask was far too big. During the execution, the mask slipped off, revealing the terrified face of a child. Witnesses described the scene as gut-wrenching. George was just 14, the youngest person in modern U.S. history to be executed. For decades, George's family fought to clear his name, enduring threats and relentless discrimination. Finally, in 2014, 70 years too late, a judge vacated George's conviction, calling the trial a gross miscarriage of justice. It was a bittersweet victory. Though his name is now cleared, George's story remains a haunting reminder of the harm caused by prejudice and the fragility of justice, especially for the vulnerable. In May 1950, 2 brothers, Viggo and Emil Højgaard, were digging for peat in the Bjælskovdal bog near Silkeborg, Denmark, when their shovels struck something unexpected, a face. At first, they thought they had uncovered the remains of a recently murdered man. The body was so well preserved that the local police were immediately called in. The skin was intact, the facial features were lifelike, and the man's peaceful expression made it seem as if he had simply fallen asleep. But once scientists examined him, they realized this was no modern crime scene. The body dated back more than 2,000 years, around 400 BCE, from the early Iron Age. This remarkable discovery would come to be known as the Tolland Man, one of the best preserved bog bodies in history. The peat bog had acted as a natural time capsule. Its acidic, oxygen-poor environment combined with the presence of sphagnum moss, had tanned the Tolland man's skin like leather, preserving even the fine stubble on his chin. His closed eyes and faint smile gave him a strangely serene appearance, as though he had died in peace. But the leather noose still around his neck told a different story, one that hinted at ritual, sacrifice, and perhaps murder. When archaeologists examined the body in detail, they found that he had been carefully placed in the bog. He was lying in a fetal position, his body positioned deliberately, with his eyes and mouth gently closed after death. This was not a careless dumping of a criminal's corpse. It was something far more intentional. Forensic experts and archaeologists joined forces to determine what had happened. The most immediate clue was the noose, still tied tightly around his neck. When X-rays and later CT scans were performed, they revealed that the man's neck had not been broken, meaning he had not died from a sudden drop, as in a typical hanging meant for execution. Instead, he had died slowly from asphyxiation, strangled by the pressure of the rope. This small but crucial detail changed everything. It suggested his death was controlled, deliberate, and ceremonial rather than punitive. His last meal, analyzed from the contents of his stomach, consisted of a simple porridge made from barley, flax, and wild seeds. Plain, modest, and possibly symbolic. From these findings, two main theories emerged. The first was that the Tolland man was a criminal execution, someone punished by hanging for a serious offense. Hanging was known in Iron Age Europe as a method of punishment, and some saw the noose as clear proof. But the care taken after his death, the gentle arrangement of his body, his closed eyes, and the fact that he was buried alone in a sacred bog argued against this. There was no evidence of trauma, no broken bones, no wounds suggesting violence or resistance. He was not discarded like a criminal, he was honored. This led to the second and more widely accepted theory, ritual sacrifice. Many scholars believe the Tolland man was offered to the gods, perhaps to the fertility goddess Nerthus or another deity, as part of a sacred ritual to ensure prosperity, good harvests, or protection. Iron Age people often viewed bogs as mystical gateways between the human and spiritual worlds, making them perfect places for offerings. Human sacrifices, though grim, were not uncommon in northern Europe at the time. Similar bodies, such as the Graubala man and the Oud girl, were found in nearby bogs, showing signs of violent ritual deaths and careful burials. Today, the Tolland man rests in the Silkeborg Museum, his face preserved in haunting detail. His calm expression still captivates visitors, silently holding on to secrets from a world long gone. Despite all the modern technology, CT scans, radiocarbon dating, forensic reconstructions, the true reason for his death remains unsolved. Was he a willing sacrifice, chosen for a sacred purpose, or a condemned man whose execution was softened by ritual reverence? No one knows for certain. What remains undeniable is that his death was not random. It was purposeful, significant, and deeply human, a story that has survived 2 millennia beneath the quiet peat of a Danish bog. Picture this. It's 31,000 years ago. There are no hospitals, no Tylenol, no doctors, just sticks, stones, and a whole lot of survival instincts. You stub your toe and it's game over. But against all odds, someone in ancient Borneo pulled off a medical miracle that's still leaving scientists shook. The oldest known human amputation. Yep, before there were Netflix doctors, there were cave surgeons with sharp rocks. Until recently, the record for earliest known amputee went to a Neolithic farmer from Europe who had a leg chopped off about 7,000 years ago. Impressive, but not ancient enough. Enter 2020. While most of us were discovering banana bread and emotional breakdowns, a team of scientists stumbled across something way cooler, buried in the depths of a cave in Indonesia called Liang Tebo. Inside that cave, a skeleton, but not just any skeleton. This one was missing a left foot and part of its leg. Naturally, people assumed it had been lost in a tragic, oops, I fell off a cliff kind of accident. But then the scientists took a closer look and noticed something weird. The bone showed signs of careful cutting and, wait for it, healing. Yeah, not only had this person survived having a leg removed, but the stump had actually healed nicely. We're talking clean cuts, no signs of infection, and evidence of continued growth afterward. Let's be clear here. Whoever performed this Stone Age surgery was basically a prehistoric rock star. No scalpels, no anesthesia, just sharpened rocks and sheer determination. Somehow, they managed to slice through skin, veins, nerves, arteries, without killing the patient or causing a nasty infection. In fact, modern studies say that even today, about 40% of major amputations can get infected. So yeah, score 1 for caveman medicine. The person who got the chop, they were likely a child at the time, based on the size of the remaining leg, but grew up into a young adult and lived for years after the operation, possibly even a decade. They eventually died in their 20s from something totally unrelated. Aliens? Saber-toothed tigers? Who knows? But their leg clearly wasn't the thing that took them out. So, what happened to the leg in the first place? Well, the cave sits in a ridiculously rugged area. Picture boulders, cliffs, and all the ankle-breaking terrain you can imagine. Maybe our ancient friend tripped, fell, and their leg got absolutely wrecked by a boulder. Or maybe a rock slide caught them at the wrong time. Whatever it was, it must have been bad enough for someone to say, "Yup, that leg's gotta go." And here's the wildest part. They didn't just survive, they thrived. Okay, maybe not in the modern influencer lifestyle kind of way, but they lived. In a world where literally everything wanted to eat or maim you, they made it. They even probably had a squad who helped them out, carried them around, shared food, and kept them alive. It's one of the earliest examples of human empathy and teamwork, because let's face it, hopping through mountains on one leg isn't exactly a solo sport. So next time you complain about slow Wi-Fi or losing a snap streak, just remember, 31,000 years ago, someone had their leg hacked off with a rock, didn't die, and still managed to be part of a prehistoric friend group. Now, that's hardcore. It was March 19th, 2015, in Kabul, Afghanistan. The air buzzed with anticipation for the upcoming Afghan New Year, and 27-year-old Farkhunda Malikzadeh had her day all planned out. A volunteer teacher and a student of Islamic law, she had dreams of becoming a judge someday. That morning, she reassured her mother, Bibi Hajera, that she'd help with the New Year's preparations once she returned from her Quran recitation class. But tragically, Farkhunda never made it back home. On her way back, she stopped at the Shado Shamshira Mosque, a seemingly ordinary decision that would change her fate. Inside the mosque, she found herself in a heated argument with Zudan, the shrine's caretaker. Farkhunda opposed his sale of amulets, believing such practices to be superstitious and contrary to Islamic teachings. The disagreement grew tense, and Zudan, in a moment of fury, shouted an accusation that would ignite a spark in the crowd gathering around them. He claimed that Farkhunda had disrespected the Quran. The accusation spread like wildfire. No one questioned its truth. A crowd quickly formed, their anger fueled by misunderstanding and a blind sense of outrage. Farkhunda, terrified but resolute, vehemently denied the claims. She repeatedly declared her faith as a devout Muslim and her respect for the Quran, but no one was willing to listen. The mob's anger escalated into violence. Dragged out of the mosque, Farkhunda was brutally attacked with sticks and stones. The police arrived, but instead of stepping in to protect her, they stood by, firing warning shots into the air and doing little to control the crowd. At one point, officers moved her to the mosque's roof, likely in an attempt to shield her, but the mob hurled objects at her until she fell back down into their midst. What followed was nothing short of a nightmare. Farkhunda was beaten to the point of collapse. A car drove over her body, dragging her along the road. As if that wasn't horrific enough, her attackers hauled her to the Kabul River, where they continued their assault. In the end, they set her body on fire, feeding the flames with their clothing. The entire scene was recorded on cell phones, the gruesome footage spreading like wildfire. When the videos surfaced, the horror wasn't just in what happened, it was in who had done it. This wasn't the work of extremists or insurgents. The perpetrators were everyday citizens, ordinary people swept up in a wave of false accusations and mob mentality. The aftermath was a wake-up call. Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani condemned the brutal act as heinous, and investigations revealed the shocking truth. Farkhunda had been innocent all along. She hadn't disrespected the Quran. She'd been falsely accused by someone angered by her principles. Her death sparked a national and international outcry. Thousands marched in protest, declaring their solidarity with Farkhunda. Women's rights activists, their faces painted red to symbolize her blood, carried her coffin, an act unheard of in a society where such roles are typically reserved for men. Her story became a rallying cry for justice and women's rights in Afghanistan, and yet, justice proved elusive. Of the 49 people charged, only 4 initially received death sentences, while others were given long prison terms. But these sentences were later reduced, and several perpetrators were released on bail, sparking outrage among activists and Farkhunda's grieving family. Today, the street where Farkhunda was killed bears her name, and her grave has become a site of remembrance. Her story continues to remind the world of the dangers of misinformation, mob violence, and societal misogyny. For her mother, Bibi Hajara, the pain is unending, but through her grief, she stands as a symbol of strength, just like her daughter. Farkhunda's tragic death wasn't just a senseless loss, it was a catalyst for change. And while her story is heartbreaking, it serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience of those who fight for justice, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Andrei Chikatilo, infamously known as the Rostov Ripper, stands as one of the most horrifying figures in Soviet criminal history. Between 1978 and 1990, his brutal killing spree spread terror across the USSR, leaving behind a trail of mutilated bodies that would haunt investigators for decades. His victims, mostly women and children, were discovered in forests, fields, and train station outskirts, their bodies bearing marks of savagery that defied imagination. When authorities first began finding these corpses, the scenes were so grotesque that many refused to believe such crimes could occur in the Soviet Union, a state that prided itself on being free from Western-style deviance. Yet reality soon shattered that illusion. Victims were found with multiple stab wounds, often dozens, eyes gouged out, and parts of their flesh missing. It was not just murder, it was a ritual of cruelty. Chikatilo's acts revealed a darkness so profound that even hardened investigators were left shaken. The first known victim was a 9-year-old girl named Yelena Zakotnova in 1978, whose body was found in a river near Shakhty. Her mutilation set a grim precedent. For years after, bodies began appearing near railway lines and forest paths in the Rostov region. Some victims were stripped naked, their throats slit, and their limbs punctured in frenzied bursts of violence. Others were missing tongues, genitals, or internal organs, injuries that seemed less like random acts and more like a disturbing compulsion. The police, constrained by Soviet ideology that denied the existence of serial killers, initially blamed hooligans or drifters. But the evidence piling up told a different story. The brutality was consistent, methodical, and personal. Each discovery, each shallow grave or mutilated corpse pointed toward a single sadistic mind at work. The investigations became a nightmare of mistaken identities and wrongful arrests. At one point, several innocent men were executed for crimes they did not commit, all while Chikatilo continued killing with cold precision. The bodies kept turning up. Children found half buried in the snow, women's remains hidden in the woods, bones gnawed by wild animals. The scale of it all was staggering. By the late 1980s, forensic teams were discovering decomposed corpses so badly mutilated that identifying victims was nearly impossible. Each find carried the same haunting signature: stab wounds to the abdomen, missing body parts, and signs of post-mortem mutilation. Pathologists noted that many victims had been sexually assaulted or mutilated while still alive. The horror was not just in the killing but in the suffering that came before death. It was not until 1990 that Andrei Chikatilo was finally caught after years of relentless police work and psychological profiling. The moment of his arrest came after he was spotted acting suspiciously near a train station where previous victims had been found. When questioned, he denied everything. But forensic evidence and a chilling confession later revealed the full extent of his crimes. In interrogation, Chikatilo described the murders with unsettling calmness, recalling how he would lure victims with promises of food, money, or help, only to unleash a storm of violence upon them. His words painted vivid pictures of agony, the screams, the blood, the twisted pleasure he derived from domination. Investigators later revisited many of the discovery sites, unearthing remains that matched his confessions, confirming the scale of his atrocities. When the trial began in 1992, the courtroom turned into a spectacle of disbelief and horror. Photos of the victims and descriptions of the crime scenes were so disturbing that even hardened officers averted their eyes. The public, who once thought such evil was impossible in their society, now faced the chilling truth. In total, Chikatilo confessed to 56 murders, though only 52 were proven. He was executed by gunshot in 1994, ending a reign of terror that had lasted over a decade. Yet, even after his death, the images of those mutilated bodies, scattered across forests, buried near railways and left in snow-covered fields, remained a scar on Soviet history. Chikatilo's crimes were not just killings, they were calculated acts of dehumanization, reminders that true horror often hides behind the most ordinary faces. All right, buckle up, because we're diving into history's first confirmed shark attack. Not exactly the first you'd want your name attached to, but here we are, 3,400 years later, still talking about one unlucky dude named Tsukumo 24. Sounds like a futuristic robot, right? Nope, just the name archaeologists gave to an ancient hunter-gatherer from Japan who had a very, very bad day. So, what happened? Back in 2021, researchers uncovered a human skeleton near the Sado Inland Sea in Japan. And let's just say it wasn't in the best shape. This guy was absolutely shredded. Like, not gym gains shredded, but chewed up like leftover jerky shredded. We're talking 790 injuries all over his body. Arms, chest, abdomen, hands, basically a full-body horror show. At first, scientists were baffled. The cuts went so deep they gouged into bone, more like what you'd expect from metal weapons than anything natural. But here's the plot twist. Tsukumo 24 lived in the Jomon era, a time when metal weapons didn't even exist in Japan. So, unless someone invented time travel to bring a samurai sword back in time just to go full Mortal Kombat on this guy, something didn't add up. Then came the aha moment. Upon closer inspection, the wounds were V-shaped, eerily similar to injuries caused by modern-day shark bites. Combine that with the fact that Japan is literally an island chain, and the conclusion was pretty clear. This man got tag-teamed by a very hungry tiger shark or great white. And it wasn't a quick snack either. It was a full-course tragedy. How bad was it? Every rib, cracked or torn, chest and guts, eviscerated. Dismembered feet and a missing hand? Yep, gone. What's worse, these weren't post-mortem injuries. He was alive when it happened, and he likely fought back, losing limbs in the process. That alone ruled out scavenging. It was a full-blown ambush. Not some shark snacking on leftovers. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Tsukumo 24 wasn't found floating at sea or washed up somewhere. He was actually discovered in a legit burial site. That means someone had the decency and bravery to recover his mutilated body and give him a proper send-off. So, what's the theory? Researchers believe Tsukumo 24 wasn't solo. He was probably out on a fishing trip with others. Jomon people were pro-level fishers after all. The theory goes that he might have jumped in the water to haul in a catch or do some spearfishing, not realizing that blood in the water was ringing the dinner bell for a nearby shark. Next thing you know, chomp chomp, full aquatic horror show. His buddies likely saw it happen and pulled him out, but by then it was game over. Now, before you cancel your Japan trip and vow to never touch saltwater again, relax. Yes, sharks still exist in Japanese waters, but back in the Jomon era, they were way more common. Fossil records show a ton of shark teeth from that time, and even ancient artwork features them, especially tiger sharks and hammerheads. So yeah, shark attacks were basically the medieval version of texting while walking into traffic. In the end, Tsukumo 24 didn't survive, but he did make history as the unfortunate owner of the world's first confirmed shark attack. Not the legacy anyone dreams of, but hey, at least he didn't get taken out by something boring like food poisoning. It was August 16, 2003, on a warm summer day at the Island County Fair on Whidbey Island, Washington. The fairgrounds were alive with the energy of families enjoying the perfect weather. The air smelled of buttery popcorn and sugary cotton candy, and kids were buzzing with excitement, running from one ride to the next. One of the star attractions that day, the Super Loop 2, a small roller coaster with a single, stomach-flipping vertical loop that had been a crowd favorite for 3 years. Operated by Paradise Amusements, a family-run carnival business, the ride was as reliable as the fair itself. Doug McKay, a 40-year-old co-owner of Paradise Amusements, was working that day. Doug wasn't just a businessman, he was carnival life, through and through. Having grown up in the industry, he'd started as a kid selling popcorn before eventually becoming the guy who kept the rides running like clockwork. Doug and his wife, Cher, had dedicated their lives to their carnival business, making it a beloved staple of the community. That afternoon, Doug noticed the Super Loop 2 needed a little TLC. The track needed lubrication, just a routine fix for someone as experienced as Doug. Confident in his skills, he decided to take care of it right away. But instead of shutting down the ride, Doug climbed up to do the maintenance while it was still operating with passengers on board. What happened next was a nightmare no one could have predicted. As Doug worked on the track, he lost his footing and slipped. His long hair became tangled in one of the fast-moving passenger carts, and in an instant, he was pulled into the air. Witnesses watched in horror as he was dragged along the track, colliding with parts of the ride before being thrown nearly 40 feet into the air. He landed hard against a metal fence, and tragically, Doug didn't survive. The accident unfolded in full view of fairgoers, including children riding the Super Loop 2. For those on the ride, it wasn't just a brush with terror, it was traumatic. Some kids were so close to the incident that they ended up covered in blood. Parents rushed to console their children, many of whom were visibly shaken. One father, Rob Voles, immediately took his 12-year-old son Dylan, who had been on the ride, home to clean him up before police could even begin questioning. Law enforcement interviewed the young witnesses as part of their investigation, but the process left some parents frustrated. They felt it was too soon to press the traumatized kids for details. Meanwhile, the fairgrounds, eerily quiet in the moments after the accident, resumed activities within the hour. The Super Loop 2, however, was shut down for good. Despite the tragedy, Cher McKay made a heartfelt decision to honor a promise she'd made to Doug, to keep the carnival running. The other rides reopened the next day, but the absence of Doug was felt deeply by his family and crew. Doug's tragic death sent shockwaves through the industry and served as a grim reminder of the risks involved in operating carnival rides. Although no charges or safety regulations were pursued, since Doug was the business owner, not an employee, his story underscored the importance of safety precautions, no matter how experienced someone might be. Doug McKay left behind his wife, Cher, and their 3 children, Travis, Michelle, and Kelsey. His funeral was held on August 26, 2003, and was attended by loved ones who gathered to celebrate the life of a man who had devoted everything to his family and his craft. His loss was a heartbreaking chapter for the industry and a lasting reminder of the fragility of life. It is hard to find a story that blends royal tragedy, mystery, and scientific detective work quite like the discovery of the Romanov family's remains. In July 1918, deep in the chaos of the Russian Revolution, Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and the young heir Alexei, met a fate both brutal and secretive. Once rulers of the vast Russian Empire, they were reduced to prisoners in a modest home called the Ipatiev House in Yekaterinburg. Guards watched their every move. The family's royal clothes were replaced with plain garments, and the walls that once echoed with the chatter of court life were replaced with whispers of revolution and revenge. On the night of July 16, 1918, the family was told they were being moved for their safety. Instead, they were ushered into a dimly lit basement, supposedly for a group photograph. Within moments, Yakub Yurovsky, the man in charge, read a brief statement sentencing them to death on behalf of the Soviet leadership. Before they could process his words, a volley of gunfire filled the room. The execution was chaotic as bullets ricocheted off walls because the Grand Duchesses had sewn diamonds and jewels into their corsets, unknowingly turning their clothing into makeshift armor. The killers resorted to bayonets and close-range shots to finish what they started. The aftermath was gruesome. Blood soaked the floors, smoke from gunfire choked the air, and the cries of confusion faded into silence. But the real mystery began after the execution. The bodies were loaded into trucks under the cover of night and driven into the nearby Koptyaki forest, where the executioners tried desperately to erase their crime. They doused the corpses with sulfuric acid to destroy their faces, chopped some into pieces, and even burned parts of them before dumping them into a shallow grave. To mislead anyone who might stumble upon the site, they filled it with dirt and logs. Then they vanished into history, leaving only rumors behind. For decades, the Soviet government denied that the Romanovs had even been killed. Instead, fueled stories that the family had been moved or that some members had escaped. This secrecy gave rise to one of the most famous legends of the 20th century, the supposed survival of Princess Anastasia, the youngest daughter. Countless imposters later claimed to be her, keeping the myth alive for generations, while the truth slept beneath the Russian soil. Fast forward to 1979, when two local researchers, Alexander Havdonin and Geli Ryabov, stumbled upon a shallow grave near Yekaterinburg. Inside, they found charred bone fragments and skulls showing signs of blunt trauma and bullet holes, grim proof of execution-style killings. But it was the Soviet era, and speaking of such discoveries could lead to prison or worse. They quietly documented their findings and reburied the bones, keeping the secret until the fall of the Soviet Union. In 1991, the site was finally excavated officially, and the truth that had been denied for 70 years came to light. Forensic experts confirmed through DNA testing that the remains belonged to Nicholas II, Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters. The damage to the bones was horrific: multiple gunshot wounds, broken bones from bayonets, and traces of acid all spoke to the ruthless nature of their deaths. Yet, 2 family members were missing: the young Tsarevich Alexei and one of his sisters, Maria or Anastasia. This kept the mystery alive until 2007, when another small grave was discovered nearby, containing the remains of a boy and a girl. DNA analysis later confirmed they were the final missing Romanovs, finally closing the century-old case. After nearly 9 decades of speculation, the Romanovs were buried in St. Petersburg's Peter and Paul Cathedral with full royal honors. What began as a brutal midnight execution had turned into one of the greatest historical detective stories ever told, a tale of lost royalty, revolutionary vengeance, and the persistence of truth that no amount of acid or denial could destroy. Back in the Neolithic era, Earth wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Between hunting your dinner, avoiding becoming someone else's dinner, and surviving in a world with no Wi-Fi, things were rough. But as if nature's challenges weren't enough, humans decided to crank the pain up a notch with DIY brain surgery. Yep, we're talking about one of the oldest surgical practices ever discovered: trepanation, or, as I like to call it, extreme hole punching for humans. Let's zoom in on a site in France dating back to around 6500 BC, where archaeologists uncovered something that might look like a prehistoric crime scene. Dozens of skulls, 38 to be exact, with neat circular holes bored right through the bone. But don't cue the Law and Order sound just yet. These weren't casualties of some ancient battle royale or mass murder. What we're looking at here is early medical intervention. Sort of. These holes weren't caused by violence, at least not the usual kind. Instead, they were the result of a deliberate surgical procedure called trepanation. It's considered one of the first widespread forms of surgery performed by Homo sapiens. And just to be clear, no scalpels, no antiseptics, and absolutely no anesthesia. Just stone tools, shaky hands, and a whole lot of pain tolerance. Trepanation involved scraping or drilling a hole into the human skull, presumably while the patient was still very much alive. And although the idea of someone coming at your head with a sharpened flint tool sounds like a horror movie setup, the practice was surprisingly common. Across multiple archaeological sites, including the one in France, trepanation appears to have been all the rage. In fact, some studies suggest up to 10% of Neolithic people underwent the procedure. At the French site, a staggering 33%. That's 1 in 3 people walking around with a literal hole in their head. Now, you might be thinking, if it was so popular, maybe it worked. Well, not really. Evidence shows that less than 40% of those trepanned skulls had signs of healing, meaning over 60% of patients likely didn't make it. The top contenders for cause of death, infection, massive blood loss, or the surgeon just poking a little too deep into the old brain matter. And for those who did survive, recovery took months, with the risk of lifelong pain, neurological issues, or just being stuck with a permanent headache bigger than the one they were probably trying to cure. So why on earth did anyone agree to this? The reasons for trepanation were as diverse as they were speculative. Some think it was done to release evil spirits, ancient brain exorcism, anyone? While others suggest it was used to treat head injuries. Fairly common in a time when clubs and rocks were the primary dispute resolution tools. It may have also been used to ease epilepsy, migraines, or even psychological conditions. Basically, if your head hurt, someone's solution was to drill a hole in it and hope for the best. Honestly, if you were alive back then, the smartest move was probably to keep your headaches to yourself. Interestingly, people of all ages were trepanned. Kids, adults, the elderly, no one was safe. And while the tools were crude, think sharpened flint, bone scrapers, or even seashells, the results were sometimes surprisingly precise. It wasn't always a hack job. Some of these ancient surgeons knew what they were doing. Sort of. Even more surprising, trepanation never truly disappeared. While the modern version is vastly more refined and done only in specific medical cases, like relieving brain pressure, it's still performed today, only now with sterile equipment and an actual anesthesiologist instead of, say, a guy with a rock and good intentions. So the next time you think you're having a rough day, just remember, at least no one's trying to fix your headache by cracking open your skull with a seashell. Progress, baby. It was a chilly November evening in 1988, the kind that makes you want to hurry home, cozy up, and forget about the world. For Junko Furuta, a 17-year-old high school student in Saitama, Japan, it was just another day. She was biking home after school, her mind likely drifting to dreams of her future. She was saving for a graduation trip and studying hard for her exams. Junko was known for her bright smile and ambitious spirit, but little did she know, her routine ride home would spiral into a nightmare that would shake an entire nation. Around 8:30 p.m., Junko was approached by 2 classmates, Hiroshi Miyano and Shinji Minato. Now, Miyano wasn't your typical teenage troublemaker. He had a reputation for violence and a dangerous obsession with Junko after she rejected his romantic advances. Minato, on the other hand, was already knee-deep in criminal activities and gang violence. Together, they set a sinister plan into motion. As Junko pedaled down a quiet street, Minato knocked her off her bike and fled into the night. Enter Miyano, playing the role of a helpful classmate, offering to escort her home. But instead of leading her to safety, he lured her to an abandoned warehouse where he assaulted her. What started as one man's revenge-fueled obsession soon spiraled into something far more horrifying. Miyano called up 2 other classmates, Joe Ogura and Yushi Watanabe, to boast about what he had done. These weren't ordinary boys. They were gang members with extensive criminal histories. Together, the group decided to hold Junko captive. The night turned into a 40-day ordeal that would go down as one of the most brutal crimes in Japan's history. By November 26th, Junko was moved to Miyano's house. The boys forced her to call her parents, claiming she had run away but was safe. Miyano even made her act like his girlfriend in front of his parents. Shockingly, his parents noticed the abuse but chose to stay silent, fearing the gang's wrath. What followed was an unspeakable series of events. For 40 days, Junko endured unimaginable suffering. She was beaten, assaulted, and tortured daily. Her captors even invited others to join in the abuse. Reports suggest nearly 100 people were involved. The cruelty knew no limits. Junko was burned, forced to consume harmful substances, and left exposed to freezing conditions. Her body was battered beyond recognition, yet her pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears. Even when Junko managed to briefly contact the police, her captors caught her and punished her even more severely. By January 1989, she was in critical condition. Her injuries were so horrific that her body began to decompose while she was still alive. Eventually, her captors grew bored and, in one final, chilling act of violence, poured lighter fluid on her and set her on fire. Too weak to fight back, Junko succumbed to her injuries on January 4th. The boys disposed of her body in a 55-gallon drum filled with cement, abandoning it in Tokyo. But their crime unraveled later that month when Miyano and Ogura were arrested for an unrelated offense. During questioning, Miyano confessed, leading the police to Junko's remains. What followed was a legal outcome that sparked outrage. As minors, the perpetrators received shockingly lenient sentences, while the others faced as little as 5 to 9 years. Even after their release, many continued their criminal ways, leaving Junko's family and the public heartbroken. Junko's story is not just a tale of cruelty, it's a harsh reminder of systemic failures. Her case ignited debates in Japan about juvenile law and the age of criminal responsibility, but the scars of this tragedy linger. While reforms have been made, the haunting question remains: was justice ever truly served? The story of Jonestown isn't just another page in history. It is one of those dark, almost unbelievable chapters that make you pause and think, how could this even happen? It all began with Jim Jones, a charismatic yet increasingly paranoid preacher who led the People's Temple, a group that started with good intentions about equality, community, and racial harmony, but slowly spiraled into full-blown fanaticism. By the mid-1970s, Jones had moved his followers from the United States to a remote stretch of jungle in Guyana, South America, promising them a socialist utopia free from the evils of capitalism and racism. What they got instead was isolation, fear, and the slow unraveling of sanity under the oppressive heat of the jungle. The place was named Jonestown, and what was supposed to be a paradise soon became a living nightmare. Inside Jonestown, life was far from the idealistic community Jones had promised. Armed guards patrolled the compound, people were forced into grueling labor, and Jones' voice constantly blared through loudspeakers, delivering endless rants about loyalty and impending apocalypse. He controlled when people ate, slept, and even thought. Letters were censored, passports were confiscated, and any attempt to leave was treated as betrayal. For many, Jonestown became a trap disguised as salvation. Things reached a boiling point when U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan decided to visit in November 1978, after receiving alarming reports from relatives of temple members who said their loved ones were being held against their will. At first, Ryan was welcomed with fake smiles and rehearsed enthusiasm, but cracks started to show when several residents slipped him notes begging for rescue. The next day, Ryan and his delegation prepared to leave with a small group of defectors, but Jones was not about to let anyone walk away. As Ryan's party waited to board planes at the Port Kaituma airstrip, armed members of the People's Temple rolled up in a tractor-trailer and opened fire. The attack was brutal and chaotic as bullets tore through the group, killing Ryan, 3 journalists, and 1 defector. Several others were wounded, but managed to flee into the jungle. Back in Jonestown, Jim Jones knew it was over. Convinced that U.S. forces would descend upon them, he gathered everyone in the pavilion and announced what he called a revolutionary suicide. Huge tubs of grape flavor aid, not Kool-Aid as popular legend says, were mixed with cyanide and sedatives. Some drank willingly, others were forced. Parents gave it to their children first. The cries that followed were described by survivors as something beyond human, a chorus of agony echoing through the jungle night. When Guyanese authorities arrived 2 days later, they found a scene that defied comprehension. The jungle was eerily silent except for the hum of insects. The smell hit them first, a thick chemical sweetness mixed with decay. As they entered the compound, they saw bodies sprawled across the ground, many lying arm in arm, as if in some haunting embrace. Over 900 people, including more than 300 children, were dead. Jim Jones himself was found slumped in his chair on the pavilion stage, a gun beside him and a bullet wound in his head. Cyanide cups and syringes were scattered everywhere. Some bodies had foam around their mouths, others clutched each other tightly, frozen in terror. The investigators were overwhelmed, not just by the scale of death, but by the eerie stillness of it all. The recovery operation was grim and grueling. The heat and humidity of the Guyanese jungle made the bodies decompose quickly, forcing rescuers to work in masks and gloves, spraying chemicals to contain the smell. U.S. troops had to be called in to help, and bodies were eventually flown out in military planes, stacked in rows like lifeless cargo. The world was stunned. Jonestown became a symbol of blind devotion gone horribly wrong. A cautionary tale about how one man's delusions could lead nearly 1,000 people to their deaths. Even decades later, the phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" lingers in our vocabulary, a chilling reminder of how charisma can twist into control and faith can turn fatal when placed in the wrong hands.